Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I know you had a choice of things you could do today or this weekend, and I appreciate you being here. I'm Barrett Hazeltine, and I teach another kind of design, which is entrepreneurship and starting companies and building organizations. Steve, well, at the end, has been part of that and knows the intersection between design and entrepreneurship, building organizations. So all I'm here to do really is just to reassure people that are more interested in entrepreneurship that a lot is going on around, and there's a big meeting coming up in 2 weeks. Big Secret's going to announce the Center for Innovation Design. So I think design and both design and entrepreneurship are in great shape at Brown. And thank you again for coming. And now I think we all want to really hear from the students, so let's go.
You guys hear us?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Isabelle. I'm a junior concentrating in civil engineering.
And I'm Gareth. I'm a junior concentrating in mechanical engineering. And this summer we built a solar-powered house in France. And as crazy as that seems, well, essentially what we started out with 2 years ago was a goal to reimagine what sustainability looks like.
So our team combines students from Brown, from RISD, and from the University of Applied Sciences in Erfurt, Germany. And this was a really colorful experience for all of us because we all specialize in different things. So Brown brought a lot of engineers to the table. RISD had students in architecture, industrial design, and furniture. And FAG out in Germany had master's students in architecture as well as some students studying business and finance. But even though Brown and RISD are right down the hill from each other, we rarely get to work together in an academic setting. So this project really provided an opportunity for us to combine forces and produce something that really did lay at the intersection between technology and design. And here's a photo of us from last fall. So we participated in a competition that was in France, but we also had German partners. So this project gave all of us an opportunity to travel both to Germany and to France and to really learn and explore how the building industry and sustainability sort of work and our approach in other countries. And that's our faculty advisor from RISD, Jonathan. Yeah.
So after we got into this competition, Isby and I were involved with starting this team and writing the original proposal. And our original proposal was to build a super efficient house that was going to meet the Passive House standard, which meant it was going to use 90% less energy to heat and cool the home. So it had to be super insulated and airtight, but we were going to make it out of a material that had never been used for residential construction before, which is this material. It's called shear fill. It's a fiberglass textile. It's coated in Teflon. It's super tough and is used on stadium roofs, and if you think of the Denver airport and big pavilion installations like that. So we were taking this material that had never been used on this scale before and making a really efficient home in a form that no one had ever seen before. So this rendering is really important to Isby and I and to the rest of our team because this was created, this rendering was finished in January of this year, and it was the final design iteration of the house. And we had this rendering and this vision for what we wanted before we had a site to build the house, before the project was remotely fully funded, before the full team was together, before we had purchased any materials to build the house. But this image and this goal is what drove us forward over the course of the next 6 months after January to get to this point, where this is what the house looked like when we built it for the second time in France for the competition. So we built the house in Providence for the first time, and here's a little animation of how the house comes together. We built it for the first time in Providence, and we built it in 4 months with the help of sponsors and partners and a huge team of students that all came out, and we worked together in a design build process to figure out the best way to build this crazy sustainable home that had this crazy new material on the outside and had these flexible solar panels that followed a double curvature on the outside of the shell. and had a central core in the building that really didn't have to work that hard to heat and cool the home because it was so well insulated. We wanted to reimagine the way to build a home because when we got to France, we had 10 days to build it instead of 4 months. So this is what it looked like in process here in Providence. There's a pretty cool time lapse of this build up in Studio One. We have an exhibition up there. And then when we went over to France, this is what it ended up looking like on the inside.
Yeah, so at the end of 10 really grueling days, this was the final interior of Techstyle Haus, which we were really excited about because we weren't able to fully complete the house in Providence. Things like our windows and some of our furniture we kept over in Europe because we didn't want to ship them here just to ship them back. So after 10 days, we weren't really sure if the house was going to come out to look exactly like our renderings, but it really did. And a lot of our furniture was designed and built by RISD students, and we got to give tours of the house all day long. And it was really exciting just to showcase all of the disciplines that went into this house. And we didn't just design and build a house, but we built all of the components and really took time and paid attention to the tiny details.
And the coolest part was this is the context in which we were building this house. This is a shot of all the teams. There were over 600 students there from 16 different countries. There was 20 teams all together that came together and each brought their different sustainable home to this arena. And it was the most amazing experience after 2 years of learning so much about the process, and it was a really amazing learning process up to this point. But I, for one, and the rest of the team learned so much in the about a month and a half we were there because we saw 20 different approaches to the same challenge of building an innovative, sustainable home. And we got to see 20 other social contexts for designing this home and the different ways that the teams operated, and we got to go to parties with the other teams and meet them, and it was very, very real after 2 years of working to see 19 other teams that were doing the same thing as us in different parts of the world. And it was just a really amazing experience.
The competition was also humbling because it put our house in a global context. So most of our audience was French, but we had people come visit from all over the world. And Americans have different standards for what they think houses look like than people in France and people in different European countries and all countries. So it was really interesting to hear the feedback and the reactions of our audience because we had really only showcased our project to Americans.
So this is a shot of some of the Brown engineering crew that worked, or the Brown crew in general that worked on the project. We, as part of this 250th weekend and the exhibition that we have upstairs, and we're just trying to drive the point home that we really see this as an opportunity for other Brown students to see this amazing experience that we had. And we really hope that this inspires other projects at Brown that are interdisciplinary, that are inter-institutional, and maybe even international, because this was just an amazing experience to make this happen. And we also wanted to take this chance to just thank Brown. Brown and RISD were so supportive, and the engineering school and the university as a whole supported us when we needed it most and really helped us make this happen. So we're really excited to be done and to say that we've done it. So,
Yeah, we have an exhibition running all weekend up in Studio One in this building. So if you want to talk to us or learn more about our project, feel free to stop by.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Barbara Weinreich. I am, we should have designed the table. I'm an architect in New York and class of 1980 from Brown. We have a big panel, but it's because it's a big topic, and we're lucky to have 2 students, 2 faculty members, 2 alumni, 3 including me, that cover a whole range of information about this topic. So it's a very exciting time for design at Brown. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this panel was to talk about where design came from at Brown and where it's going. Many designers came out of Brown, but it's not known as a design school in particular, and I think that's going to change in a very exciting way. So you have the bios of all the people who are on the panel in front of you, but briefly I'm just going to say their names, and then we're going to start with the questions. My questions to them, not your questions to me. So this is Susan Yelavich. Dietrich Neumann, Isabelle, tell me your last name.
Lubin.
Isabelle Lubin, Derek Stein, Gareth, and Steve Glenn at the end. So what I'd like to do is start sort of traditionally with where Brown sits in the history of design education. I'm going to ask Dietrich, who is a professor of architectural history and urban studies and well known for inspiring many people to go on to architecture careers, to give us a little bit of background about traditionally what the design education was at Brown.
Mm-hmm. There is actually a long history at Brown. I found some evidence that in 1895 we had about 5 years of architectural training here at Brown, and one man who profited from it and got so inspired that he went on to MIT, and the École des Beaux-Arts was Raymond Hood, who then became the skyscraper designer of the 20s, did Rockefeller Center and Chicago Tribune. And so we've often, through the years, sort of fed into other programs, but there was a moment in the 90s of the last, or the 19th century, where we were very actively involved, and Norman Isham led this program. I don't know why it ended, but then I find evidence in the 30s where there's a joint design panel between Brown and RISD in a big conference where Frank Lloyd Wright comes to campus and gives a very rousing speech and says how much he loves the campus architecture and how much he hates Yale's architecture. All neo-Gothic going up at that time in 1932. And so it continues, and then to jump into the present really, for the last 5 years, we've had a design studio, Introduction to Architectural Design, which has, I think, been very successful and has led to more students going to Yale and Harvard and other schools in architecture. And of course, there has been this great Creative Mind initiative with Ian Gonsher and Richard Fishman and many others at the same time. So the last 5 years have been really intense already. And we look forward. We had a joint studio with RISD on urban planning, the 195 land downtown last year, and now we're at this point. From next year onwards, we'll have a joint master in architectural design between Brown and RISD, and we're just working towards it. There is a big conference to launch it at the end of April. You'll hear about it when that comes. So we feel we're making good progress towards more and more involvement and preparing students for an approach to design which takes all of Brown's strength into consideration, meaning the context, the social conscience, the engineering knowledge, the historic and liberal arts context that architects really need.
Would you say traditionally, though, training for architecture came out of a more fine arts tradition, sort of a classical beaux-arts? Either it was history or you were drawing and you were sent to France to, see how the French did it and then come back and copy that here. I mean, is that's true of also Brown? There wasn't specific design classes and anything other than that?
Exactly. It was really the sort of context of architectural history and architectural studies. I found wonderful photos of the first floor of Manning Hall where they had models of the Colosseum and temples out of plaster, I guess, and they are all gone, unfortunately, probably lying in the Seekonk River somewhere. They were discarded as other items, but it came out of this awareness of history, and I feel to a certain degree in architectural design education today at traditional architecture schools that part has been lost, and we want to bring the humanities back into architecture, and I think Brown can really play an important role there.
Well, I know that a good part of my architectural education was studying precedents. So that's actually where history comes in. You study what other people have done, different prototypes and things like that. And that's the tradition that I came out of. I studied architectural history with William Geordie, and then went on to architecture school after that. But it does seem to me like that's changing a bit. Derek, I wanted to go on to you. So you were one of the advisors on Techstyle Haus, but you are actually a biophysicist. Yes. And I'm curious how you got involved in this and also what your impressions of design are. But could you start by telling us how you got involved in making a house?
I got involved mainly because I have an interest in energy. So even though my research is focused more towards biophysics, I organized an energy seminar series at Brown, and I taught a course on the physics of energy. And because of that, I think I became known as like the energy guy. So when Brown's students, the engineers, got interested in this project, they knew they needed a faculty advisor, and so they asked around who'd be interested, and my name came up. So one day Gareth and another student, Matt Breuer, came to my office and said, we need an advisor. We're going to be in the solar decathlon. What's that? I was like, we're going to build a solar-powered house. Oh, really? I had no idea what the solar decathlon was before that. It sounded interesting. It sounded kind of implausible the way they were describing it. But yeah, how much is it going to cost me to get involved? And then the more I discovered, the more I realized this is for real and this is incredible. And I remained very interested in doing this, and it in fact grew because this became for me also a way of getting involved in energy in a way that was much more immediate than research, which can pay off in the sort of 20-year time scale. And so I have discovered over the course of working on this project new ways of focusing my ideas that may allow me to contribute to this thing that's always passioned me, but in a way that's more direct than just research.
So have there been any direct applications? I mean, so you're more interested now, but are there any overlaps with the kind of work you do technically with what you've learned from here?
Almost none. So the specifics, so whereas during the day I wonder whether a charged pore's electrokinetic forces gives rise to Taylor dispersion in particles. That has nothing to do with trying to build a sustainable house, but when you think about things analytically, you can just choose a new problem to focus on. And when we were in Versailles, one of the things that I got to do was meet the director of research at a major building materials company, a guy named Dietrich Neumann, who directs research and development at Saint-Gobain, which is a French multinational which makes all sorts of building materials. The glass in the original Palace of Versailles, the Hall of Mirrors, was made by Saint-Gobain. That's how the company got its start. And this fellow is a physicist, and he takes a physicist's approach to building science. And so he realizes, like I realized over the course of working on this project, that there's lots of room for engineers and scientists who think about things in a different way to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Steve, I'd like to move on to you because your business is about making houses that are designed by architects. Can you tell us a little bit about where you came from too? Because I know you were a protege of Dean Hazeltine. So you come from not a typical design background at Brown, but you have moved into it.
Yeah, well, growing up, I wanted to be an architect. I had books on Frank Lloyd Wright and Legos, and that's the first thing I ever remember wanting to be. And I got to Brown and I got interested in technology, which is where I spent my career until I started LivingHomes, a company I'm with now. But I still thought at Brown that I might go into design, so I did a summer program, the Career Discovery Program at Harvard, and I learned there that I had actually neither the talent nor temperament to be an architect, unfortunately. But I was exposed to the work of James Rouse, who did Faneuil Hall in Columbia, Maryland, and actually a number of really incredible projects. And what I learned from Rouse, or what I appreciated by studying Rouse, is that if you actually care about the nature of the built environment, developers are more important to architects. I mean no disrespect, but I think you know what I'm talking about, because developers control land and budget, they hire architects or not, and they let them do great things or not. And so I concluded that someday I should become a developer. A, no talent to be an architect. B, developers are more important. And C, I concluded the world could use more responsible developers. So I resolved, well, I'll do that someday, but I spent a couple decades in tech before I felt like the time was right to get into design.
So the concentration you did at Brown was actually, what was it called?
I was an organizational behavior management major, which Dean Hazeltine had put together.
And specifically for you, so I know that how did you come up with the idea of LivingHomes in terms of, I'm going to get really good designs by good architects, but I can buy a kit house from you, is that right? Is that essentially it?
Well, no. I mean, we put it together, but it's prefabricated. But so, architecture is sometimes described as a practical art, and I am most interested in, and hopefully practice, very much the form and function design approach. And many architects don't focus more on function or more on form. And at its best, I think that approach does what startups do too, which is where I've spent most of my time. I've worked for some big companies, but I've mostly done startups, which is really identify a problem, or set of problems, and then say, here's the solution for those problems. So for LivingHomes, I observed that there were a large and growing number of people, they're variously called the cultural creatives, who really value design, health, and sustainability in the products they buy. So they're driving Priuses or Volts and shopping at Whole Foods or buying organic from Costco. They use Apple products. They read Wired or Dwell. They do yoga. Am I describing anyone here? And Patagonia. So as I just alluded to, there are lots of companies that really offer products that have the blend of form and functionality, and that are built in a healthy and sustainable way that these consumers value. But the production home builders, the KB Homes and Ars, Pulte, Centexes of the world, don't build for those consumers. So I said, I'm going to start a company to build homes for those people. So we've got to do great design. And we actually led with design, but we have to build them in a way that really minimizes their ecological footprint and that makes them as healthy as possible. And so to do that, we got to get great architects and integrate an extremely comprehensive environmental program. But we've got to build them in an efficient way, and that's where prefabrication came from. So that's how this came about. It was looking at a problem. There's these consumers, they have lots of products in different categories, but they don't have homes. Let's build a home for them, and the rest sort of naturally followed. Which again, architecture at its best does the same kind of thing. Here's the problems, here's the solutions.
Right. So it is about addressing a concern that needs to be addressed. Okay, now I'd like to go on to Susan. So you came out of a fine arts background at Brown.
Not exactly. I was at Brown. The gift of Brown was synthesizing disciplines, and it was pretty close. It was fine arts and art history. And there was no such thing as design history anywhere but England, perhaps, at that point. But there was Bill Geordie, and there was architectural history. So he was the most remarkable teacher and gifted architectural historian. He was the formative influence on my life. So fine arts would sort of skew that perspective in an odd way. I did go on to get an MFA at Cranbrook and thought I would be a painter, but backed into working at a museum for 26 years, the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, where all of a sudden architecture was just one set of practices amidst product design, communication design, and the biggest gift of Cooper Hewitt was making goes back to prehistory. So a lot of people want to position design as a product of the Industrial Revolution when you draw and you manufacture, and I don't see it that way. I think there's a larger historical trajectory that we should pay attention to. And then after being there 26 years, I went to Parsons, where I now run an MA in design studies. And even though I grew out of architecture in a sense, I remember Michelle Addington at Yale telling me, buildings are just a collection of products. And I'm sure you students recognize that. There's just the idea that these disciplines are discrete is nonsense to me. I mean, yes, there are traditions of making. There's pedagogists. Architects tend to have they don't have the need for as much storytelling or narrative that other disciplines have. I mean, one of the things that I recognize is that most designers are too busy doing what they do to reflect critically on what they do. And we're in a written form that can be debated. I mean, certainly you reflect critically in the making. Making is criticism, period. But then there's another kind of, where does this fit in social values? How does it, for example, the tech house. I mean, I'm thinking, what cultural considerations? I was so glad you mentioned that you were exposed to different cultures and different approaches to housing, because the adoption of visionary projects will always be inflected through cultural lenses, right? That's why we're not living in Bucky Fuller's structures now. As much as I love Bucky.
Susan, can you talk a little bit about what your program at Parsons is? Because what's interesting about this is that it's not about learning to become a designer. It's actually about studying design. And part of the component that I think is important to you is also social action through design, which I think is something also that's being manifested in Techstyle Haus and also what Steve's doing. So can you talk a little bit about the design studies?
Right. Design studies is different from design history. We wish there were design history programs at places like Brown that encompassed all aspects of communicating and object production as well as architecture. But design studies looks at design as a mode of thought. I mean, basically, design makes us human. As a colleague of mine says, we're all kind of failed animals. We have to have tools. We can't build our own dams necessarily. And so, yet culturally, we really denigrate making. I mean, Hannah Arendt said that, you know, animal laborans was inferior to homo faber. Speech and action is superior to making. And we do this at our risk when we're in a global crisis, a climate crisis. And I think what we try to do in design studies is look at the potency for design to be affirmative as well as critical of practices. So when my new book comes out, Design is Future Making, you'll see that design studies embraces a host of things from the design of the Olympics and reflections of nationalism to textile structures and their relationship to architecture and what cultural memory comes through that. I think what it does is, especially at the New School, we are situated amidst sociologists and philosophers and anthropologists. So the question is, how does making and what we make change human relations at the bottom line?
So it's also a very interdisciplinary, it's a synthesis of a lot of different things as opposed to specialization in one thing. And I think what's interesting about the program is that non-designers studying design to see how, things can happen, change can happen through the history of design, studying examples.
And going forward, who's pointing to directions? What are the best practices? Is sharing, like bike shares, or is that a is that a model? Don't design anything new, just capitalize and harness everyday knowledge. Mm-hmm. So looking at that critically, looking at the values, what do you get from that? What do you lose in that model of design? Because there is still a spectrum of models. I mean, I sort of feel schizophrenic. I grew up in an object culture, and there's still a design world of fairs and magazines, but then there's all this work kind of like Techstyle Haus and radical farming and, where design's getting very elastic in its purview. And we need to be critical of that. We need to look at that and say, it's just happening? No, we have to ask why.
Okay. So Gareth and Isabelle. So you did you tell us in your presentation what motivated you to get started in Techstyle Haus? And I'm curious about that. I want to know how it changed the way you felt about design, or if design has now become something more important to you, and something you consider. So do you want to start by just saying how you got started?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, Gareth and I both started this project about our third week of freshman year at Brown. Wow. So,
did somebody present it to you? Is here something you might think about doing, or?
So Jonathan Knowles was the original impetus to starting the project. He's an architect at RISD. He teaches mainly sustainable architecture there, and he came up to Brown, and I saw in Morning Mail that there was going to be a proposal to start a solar decathlon team, and I went to an info session. I think I probably sat next to Isby, and there were 10 people there probably, and here's this guy from RISD pitching this crazy project that we had heard. I'd heard of the solar decathlon, but really didn't know much about it.
Did you come into Brown knowing sort of what you were interested in doing? Because freshman year you haven't picked a concentration yet, right?
We both started in engineering our freshman fall. Gareth's in mechanical and I'm in civil, and I think we were both excited about the idea of actually having the opportunity to build something. Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, I received an email describing this competition that I'd never heard of before, but it said it was in France, and I speak French, so I was like, maybe if I show up. I don't know anything about engineering, but I could tell them that I could speak French, so maybe they'll let me do this. Which
called leveraging experience, I think.
Yeah, but we soon realized that.
A single thing you learned coming out of Brown is a really good thing.
Yeah, but it turned out that most people on our team didn't know how to design or build a full house, certainly not a solar-powered one, so everybody sort of fell into a role that they wanted to do because there wasn't a hierarchy of who had more experience than the other one, because we came from different backgrounds and everybody
was excited and passionate and driven, but nobody really excelled in one area necessarily from the start.
Also, you were working with RISD students, right? So they must have come from a very different mindset. I mean, their design thinking would be different from your design thinking, possibly.
Well, just, I mean, to your question about our perspective on design, like I don't think I really had a clear picture of what design was until we started working with RISD and learning to speak RISD and going down there and being in the RISD zone, because we ended up semi-living there for the last 2 years. But I think we got to a point where we came in with one idea of design as I came into some of our first brainstorming sessions with this mechanical system. I wanted to put it in the house, and like this crazy door contraption that was going to air seal the house, and the RISD kids would come in and like have sketch drawings of like the shape of the house and the like context in which it was going to fit into some imagined landscape. And I think we both got to an equilibrium point at the end where we keep saying this over and over again, but we really realized that it was a collision of design and technology in the end that got us to where we were. So I think I had an idea from the beginning of how RISD saw design and how we saw design, but that synthesis wasn't clear to me how important that was until the end. There was a lot of give and take in terms of form and function.
I think, some of the most successful architects and architectural statements have been when engineers and architects work together closely, like Lucon and Commandant, is that the name of, because he worked with this concrete engineer so closely, he could achieve things that he could visualize, but probably had no idea how to actually do. So, I think there is a history of that, but what I see now is that it's really coming together in kind of a very exciting way where architects are thinking about things in engineering terms. There are product designers, there are textile designers, things like that, that's all coming together at the same time right now. So now I'd like to open it up to questions to the group, and like if you guys have questions for each other too, please do so. We'll do this for a couple of minutes, then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and then we'll have the chance to do one final statement from everybody on the panel. So, Brown has a tradition of interdisciplinary education. So I wanted to know if there were pros and cons to interdisciplinary design education. Can it get too diffuse, or, should it be more specialized? Anybody have thoughts on that?
I think I would just say we've been talking about this. Isby and I now have this gaping hole in our lives. We were kind of working a full-time job for the last 2 years, and we were saying the other day, we've been meeting with different people and talking about the aftermath of the project, and what we saw as so valuable in the interdisciplinary process was that, like, Brown and RISD often, just as a good example of interdisciplinary learning, was like Brown and RISD try to have cross-registered classes, and they try to have things that are organized on the administrative level. But for us, like this project, we pitched this to administrators like probably 2 months into design and development, and it was a student effort, and we were working on a common problem and initiative that wasn't academically organized for us to be a collaborative experience. So that was something that was valuable for us in the interdisciplinary realm. Is like it wasn't organized to be a structured thing where Brown and RISD students would come to this course. It was just students that were getting together to solve a problem, and the architects knew they would need engineers, and the engineers needed architects, and yeah.
Do you think that there's a difference in, Derek, in what you do also in the way the different disciplines approach a design problem, or like use what's called design thinking to solve a problem? Like has working with designers affected the way?
There are big differences. So Gareth already mentioned some of them. The fact that engineers, everyone likes their contribution to be central. Or at least that's the way they imagine it. I'm a technologist, so my thing is going to be, make it the world's, most efficient house. we're going to have the best HVAC system. And then the architects might say, we're going to have the most beautiful shape. Right? And so everyone comes at it from a perspective of like, my contribution might be central. So getting things together early and the give and take going, I think that is important. Now, but fundamentally how the process differs. One thing that I noticed about RISD architecture, that kind of design, they're different kind of architects. RISD are particular. And one of the things that distinguishes them, I think, is first of all, there was a strong emphasis from my perspective on the narrative. So I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that maybe not. So whereas a technologist might say, this has got these features, it's got this bandwidth, it's this light, think of an iPhone. It's just got a bunch of specs, compare a Galaxy with an iPhone. With architecture, like, no, this is not just a house with this insulation value, with this. This is an experiment. This is a challenge to traditional building methods. This is an attempt to do a residential house, in a completely arbitrary form with a new building method that is adaptable to any context and so on. So this is what motivates people. And in a way, it focuses your thinking. If there's a story that is a compelling story, then your design better agree with at least the most important parts of that story. And then things that aren't really critical fall into the background, as perhaps they should. So that was one thing. The second thing about the design process is the willingness of at least RISD architects to go back to square one. There would be an entire elaborated design. It's like, okay, this is good, then you critique it, and then, all right, toss it in the garbage, start all over again. New challenge. And this happened for the better part of a year. Now, in engineering and science, it's more incremental. Right, you build on something, you iterate, you refine. If I ever took my students' work and said, that's really nice what you've been doing, toss it all away, start a new set of experiments, they would lynch me. There's no way I'd survive. But in architecture, in this kind of design, it's possible. And I realized with each iteration, people were learning things and they were getting stronger. And kind of like with a musician practicing, in the end, you've got your chops, and now when it's time, okay, this one's for real. Then all of a sudden they were strong, they were fresh, and the design reflected everything that was learned in all those other iterations.
I think those are very good points, because I know you, as an architect, you have to be willing to give up things you love in the design. You can't hold on to it, because what happens is you start to do something and you started with this thing you really love and everything builds off it, and you realize after a while that that's not working anymore and you have to get rid of it. And that's sort of the same thing as, okay, I'm just gonna, how about this way? How about that way? And you really do have to be fluid about it, which is painful, but it's stronger at the end because you've given up that child who was, not supposed to be in the room anyway.
But isn't that iteration, we're talking about a spectrum of iteration. You could call it editing if you're a writer. I was thinking I've taken things and had to throw them out. I always take chunks of text and put them in a file called outtakes, thinking, I can't throw that away. I never look at them again. I think we all iterate. I am really going to be the pain in the neck here and say I don't think there is such a thing as design thinking that's peculiar to design, unless it has some sort of spatialization, visualization. The product of design thinking could be a new law, could be a new system. It doesn't have to be a thing. But if it doesn't involve some sort of representation or prototyping, then I think a lot of disciplines think iteratively. It's just different scales and different paces.
Well, maybe that's...
It's just become such a brand now, design
maybe
thinking.
That's, that iterative process that is more visible in design. Maybe that's why that term has been applied to other things. Because many things are iterative, but you can see it physically in design. What about that narrative idea? When you said there is no narrative, it's like, whenever we design in my office, we come up with a story for the space.
But
that we check back on.
But that's packed into that story, and this would be a great design studies investigation, are certain assumptions about how we are going to buy things, sell things, live, eat, and that's the narrative that is tacit. And that's exactly why practice is different from scholarship, because practice critiques through making, the way a musician does. Scholarship sits back and says, well, you know, and it's a very challenging thing to do, and to some extent design studies is still in the gestation stage. I mean, we are part of an institute now called the Graduate Institute of Design, Ethnography, and Social Thought at the New School. And we had our first meeting of scholars who are ethnographers, anthropologists, sociologists, and designers, and you could just see them all looking at each other like, do I really understand what she's saying? You know, that kind of thing that happens with clients, I'm sure with you sometimes, and it takes tremendous patience. But the narrative, to me, is unpacking, to use that very popular code word now, the assumptions in the best things we do as well as in the dangerous things we do.
All right, so actually now I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience if you have any. It doesn't have to be about what we've even been talking about. You know, if you want to know more about our Brown backgrounds or more about, you know, the future of what everybody's doing or whatever you guys want.
So, at the back.
It's the back there somewhere.
Way back.
I'm curious, it was a competition, so how did you fare?
Oh, good point.
Yeah. So we came into this competition, and you saw the house. It's so different, and we came in with a house that looked nothing like anybody else had, and we did what we wanted to do. We came in with this beautiful house that caught everybody's eye, and everybody was so amazed that it was so different, and it performed objectively really well. Unfortunately, maybe some people were not ready for what it was saying and how different it was, which is something every time that Isby and I were running the sponsorship for the project, and we'd try to pitch this to companies, and sometimes they would just be so confused, and a lot of them signed on because they were confused about what it was. And so we overall we were about middle of the pack, but objectively, like in measurable form, the house did really well. Thermally, like we met the benchmarks that we wanted to meet. Subjectively, some judges didn't quite get the vision that we were looking for. I don't know if you guys want to.
You'll make a great architect.
We finished 14th. We finished 14th out of 20, and it's correct. The things that were objective, measuring, you know, comfort conditions, we did very well. In some juried categories, communications, energy efficiency, we did well. But the most subjective ones, where the juries were also regionally less on our side. What was the? I learned the meaning of haters gonna hate, and so yeah, so we got hammered in a few of those.
And by the way, I will say this: I was a judge for the 2013 Solar Decathlon in the U.S. It's a little bit different, the judging criteria, but mostly the same kind of categories. I can attest that the more subjective categories they would probably have a harder time with, because designs that do take a bold approach are not rewarded. So
it's basically because of the way it looked. You lost points on the way it looked because people were not ready for this.
Not necessarily the way it looked, just it was ambitious in its narrative.
Okay, for example, architecture, the jury did not like it. We finished in the bottom half of all designs, most of which were boxes, many of them modules that came off the backs of trucks. You might ask, why is this? Well, in their explanation, the architecture jury decided that a textile house should emphasize lightness, and the fact that we use steel members violates this necessity. Whereas a structural engineer who needs to sign off on this, otherwise you don't get to build it, specifically say you must make this out of steel. So there was kind of discrepancy between ambitions that the jury had when they came and looked at our house, who mentioned nothing about the way you experience the space, and the requirements of physics. And so for this reason, I thought this is one where we were unfairly punished, especially since it was so beautiful.
I'm sort of curious, actually. So there's a national solar decathlon, and then there's an international one.
Yep.
So had you guys thought of also presenting this in a national one, or why? What was the difference?
can't.
You can't.
They're completely separate. So the U.S. Solar Decathlon started in 2002 and took place in the National Mall in D.C. And they all happen every 2 years. And this was the third Solar Decathlon Europe. So the first two were in Madrid, correct? In 2010 and 2012. And 2014 and hopefully 2016 we're in Versailles. And they also started a Solar Decathlon China, and now we're doing Solar Decathlon Latin America. And in the Solar Decathlon Europe, you evidently don't have to come from Europe, but can come from all over the world. And we were RISD had participated in 2005 in DC, and Brown had never done it before, but we were just excited about the idea of going to France and trying and participating and putting our house. Yeah.
You could go to France instead of the mall.
How much I'm curious about this project. I love its propositional value. I mean, it doesn't have to be instrumental. It doesn't have to be something that can be reproduced or adapted right away. But to what extent were you aware of precedents, like, the bias in blob architecture from, when people got excited they could use algorithms to make curves like Frank Gehry. That to a certain juror, this might have made this look dated, which is neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned. But what about readings like Tony Fry and Design is Futuring? What kind of readings to contextualize your thinking as you did you do?
So a lot of the concept development, to be honest, came from discussions that we had over the course of a few months with a lot of RISD architects, and there was a RISD studio dedicated to the development of the idea. There was some study we were doing, I have no idea who it was, but it was some sort of igloo-shaped houses that you would like spray a concrete mixture onto the outside of, and there were case studies that we were talking about, but the main thing that we started with wasn't contextual cases, but the idea of using a non-traditional building material to redefine the building process. And we just started with the idea of RISD has an amazing textile school. We have textile students who are excited about this project even before we just called it Techstyle Haus. Let's try to make a house out of these high performance textiles that are emerging as a new building material. And then that kind of led us into, that was the original proposition.
Right, but I'm curious because I met a senior last year who did a design and engineering project with RISD that was very different. Yeah. And it sounded like, Chris Bull told me there were readings, but it was a little fuzzy to me. Like there was, if you're going to design something with RISD, there's Richard Sennett's book, The Craftsman, seems like required reading. I just think that the missing piece, if I want to make a plug for, this kind of approach, is to have a common text as well as a common practice.
Yeah.
Question?
Question, the old man, am I right, what's your name?
Steve.
Oh, did you just say old man?
Old man.
Alumni.
Oh, sorry. the young guy heard that too.
I'm an old man.
I mean, and I have no problem with that, because I actually am, but first time I would have never heard that. So.
But it's a question from a development perspective, how you might take Gareth and Isa's idea and scale that. So from a green scale perspective, and what you look at from a mobile cell perspective, what do you think about the balance between the aesthetic design and how you might say this is a great way we can use this modular housing and sell it?
Well, I mean, to evaluate whether it's a good product, because what we try to do at LivingHomes is create products, which is to say it's a home, but it's got to be reproducible, it's got to be supportable, it's got to be appealing, it's got to have the right price performance. One of our key criteria is it's got to have really low ecological footprint. So there are lots of practical questions that I want to understand. What's going to be the budget to do this? What about its scale? How available are the materials? Any durability issues? Any support issues? Like all that stuff before we even get to now. Is there? First is, do we think people like this, right? And then if the answer is yes, then all those other kinds of questions. And let me say this about the design. I think it's an interesting approach, really interesting, to use the material they used as a super shell, one that sounds like it has great performance from an energy perspective. I personally believe that the market for homes that are curved is limited. While appealing from an aesthetic perspective probably to a greater group, the number of people who find it practical from a living perspective, like furniture isn't designed for curves, it's much smaller. For example, what's the apartment building in Chicago? There's a famous Twin Towers curved, and I love those buildings. But you talk to people who live in them, and it's like, well, I put my bed in, and then there's this, thing behind it. It's weird. And things fall behind it, and I can never get there. So I'm not sure how practical, but there's something here, and something important actually, that probably could be a product.
Well, did the material dictate that it had to be curved, or was that an additional?
I would say yes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the nature of textiles
Yeah.
asks for it to be exploited that way.
Yeah, to be honest, we started with, we had 3 major concept developments at the beginning of the project. One was called Aditecture, one was called House, and one was called Techstyle Haus. And we stole the name from Techstyle Haus because the actual model looked like a tube sock that we couldn't build and nobody would want to live in. But we started on the path of going down this design concept called Aditecture, and it was much more what Steve was talking about. It was a square building, and definitely, without a doubt, from an engineer's perspective, I was annoyed when we moved away from it because it was so practical, and it was this house that was using textiles, and you could rearrange the layout of the house. We called it, like, we had a bachelor layout and like a small family layout and a big family layout, and there were so many practical things that were great about that model, but we were using textiles and they were taking the form of traditional walls, and it was just a decision amongst the team that we wanted to show what textiles could do and the forms that they could create. And so we did go with something that is totally not immediately marketable and probably not like relevant to someone's needs. Like, no one needs a curved house, but we were just kind of showing like the embodied characteristic of textiles and what you could do. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So we're gonna wrap it up now. You can ask me later. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I'd like to note that I think this is really a very exciting time at Brown around design, and that the fact that all these different disciplines are discovering each other and reaching, leaving Barrett and Holly and, passing by List and going to RISD. I mean, that's pretty exciting. So, and we should get more architects to go into Barrett and Holly actually and see what's happening, because there's some amazing stuff going on there. So I'd like to just, briefly, just a thought as we wrap up. First of all, thank you all for coming, and Steve all the way from California. What are your hopes for the future of design at Brown, or a wrap-up statement on your own?
Well, let me say this, and this gets back to your multidisciplinary. There is no other approach for buildings than multidisciplinary, and let me say why I say this. For those of us who believe that there is increasingly negative climate change and humans are the problem, buildings are the worst, are the biggest challenge that need to be addressed. Buildings are 40% of carbon emissions in the US. About 39% of all energy that's produced is used to light, cool, heat buildings. And so the most important problem is how to make buildings more energy, water efficient, resource efficient. And oh, by the way, you still have budget constraints, you still have practical constraints, like people who use the buildings have to find. So to solve all those problems, you need to have people from different disciplines. And Brown is uniquely capable of turning out people who will think creatively about how to solve increasingly challenging problems in this domain. So I'm really excited about the work that's happening here.
So for me, I take it as a given that anybody who's coming to Brown and thinking about design or engineering or architecture understands socially it's so important to address climate change, and there are things and goals that students have here And for me, this was a lesson in the best way to facilitate students to be able to meet those goals. And this project took on a form that is probably the most amazing educational experience that ISB and I will ever have. And we learned so much more doing this project than when we will in the classroom. Sorry, Brown. But we did this on our own, to be honest. It was a group of students from RISD and Brown, and we had amazing support from the university, but this wasn't, like, it was roughly structured around classes, but this was a team of students that were really passionate about an issue. And I think moving forward at Brown, with engineering, with design, with ties with RISD, the best thing we can be doing is to encourage students to find these problems and organize around initiatives that aren't curricular, they're not academic, they're just a problem out there that a team of students wants to solve, and to make sure that they get the support they need. So I think that in itself will encourage future design and a next level of learning at Brown.
I also want to see Brown support more project-based learning. So students should be able to get credit for what they're doing in projects like this. It is fine to try to have an interdisciplinary education, but I don't think the solution is to try to teach students how to do everything. You can't do that. You eventually get to a point where you don't know something, and interdisciplinarity is being able to find somebody who does and work with them. And these projects teach that. So I want Brown to support that.
The most important aspect of this project for me was really working within our team, because I think Brown obviously has an open curriculum, and that's really, really great. But it's not until you work so closely with someone in a discipline entirely outside of your own that you really can gain an understanding of what it is that they teach in another curriculum and in another department. And I think that that's really important for teamwork and group work, in allowing projects such as Techstyle Haus to grow and be the best that they can be, is understanding where other students are coming from based on what they're learning in their classes, which is really hard to do if you're an engineer and you live in Barrett and Holly and you're exposed to scientists and mathematicians, but not so many people who think like designers, so to speak, or who take foundational architecture classes and learn that way of thinking and that way of working as a team. So I hope that this project inspires other students at Brown and at RISD to sort of take more initiative in exploring other departments to gain a better understanding of where other students are coming from in their ideas and their approaches to problem solving.
For those of us who have been engaged in working towards a collaboration between RISD and Brown in fields of design, and I have to say quite honestly, that's not always a smooth process. It has been going on for a long time, and sometimes it stalls and it's slow going. And for us, this is really a great gift, because we can now point at your project and can say, look what can come out of this. And it's a fantastic result, and I think it speaks to the great potential of the collaboration between these two institutions next to each other. And so I think it's a great thing that we'll exploit the hell out of course, in our negotiations with the administration, to say, you know, this is a wonderful result, and we want more of this, of course, in the future.
I think you should call it study abroad at home. In a sense, because we think nothing of study abroad programs where students learn a different culture, but you're actually talking about learning different cultures of practice and intellect. I think that the Brown and RISD collaboration or relationship satisfies project-based learning in an interesting way. What I think is missing is, and here I sort of fall back on the culture of the word, you know, something that will endure past the ephemerality, you know, a book, something written, something that will take this project and make it live in other projects like it. So I think that if there's an opportunity at Brown, it's to be as strong in the scholarship of design as it is in the scholarship of architecture.
Okay, and having covered a lot of ground in a short period of time with a really wonderful panel, I thank you all for attending.